Welcome to Azelinguistics. This channel is about all things linguistic, discussing topics in phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and sociolinguistics. So let's see what we've got today. How can sounds which are not next to each other influence each other? That's a good question, right? What is the evidence? So I'm going to show you some evidence. Again, the Persian word for cow is gav. And of course, it sounds like a cognate with English because Persian is Indo-European, English is Indo-European. So the sound is gav, and everybody says gav. But there is a variant of this which some people like, it's a dialectal, or maybe I would say sociolectal variation. Okay, so what is happening here? So the way I can explain this, if you look at the table, you see g is voiced velar plosive, v voiced labiodental fricative, but voiced labiodental fricative becomes voiced bilabial plosive. So a fricative sound becomes a plosive sound, which is similar to g. So in this case, the sound v, which is fricative, becomes plosive like g. So it is the plosiveness of g flowing forward to v. So it is assimilation because both become similar in terms of being plosive. It is forward, so it's progressive. But it is not contiguous, it is non-contiguous, and it is partial. This was partial non-contiguous progressive assimilation. You might say, what about total non-contiguous progressive assimilation? Is there any evidence for that? In Sanskrit, there's sibilant assimilation. So this takes place in Sanskrit. What takes place is two different sibilants as the onset of successful syllables. It means when you have two syllables that follow each other and both have a sibilant in the beginning, the sound sa becomes he. I'm not sure I can pronounce it correctly. Alveolo-palatal fricative. But what it happens is here, well, we know that Sanskrit comes from Proto-Indo-European, from which all these languages, including English, Persian, German, Spanish, are derived. Some of them are close to Proto-Indo-European, some of them are farther removed. So Sanskrit is very close to Proto-Indo-European. So if you have a word which is smekru, and I'm not claiming that I'm having a very accurate pronunciation, but if you have smekru in Proto-Indo-European, by the time that word comes to Sanskrit, it becomes smakshru. And the thing is, this one, the sa, is sibilant, okay? And then apparently this is also sibilant, so it's a sibilant version of k. So we have two sibilants, so sme, kru, sme, one syllable, kru, one syllable, and se and this variant of k are both sibilants. So you have two sibilants in the beginning of two successive syllables, the onset of two successive syllables. In Sanskrit, they become totally similar, you see? There's another example of assimilation. So there's a kind of assimilation which is called reciprocal assimilation or coalescence. It means that sound A and sound B, so AB becomes CC. So AB do not become AA or BB. They become CC, and in becoming CC, they come together, they coalesce, they become reciprocally similar to something else rather than one becoming similar to the other. And this seems to be the case in the Sanskrit data. But I'm going to give you an example from English, modern day English, in which this happens. So the sentence, raise your hand. If I enunciate it, speak it slowly, how do you pronounce it? Of course, you say, raise your hand. But if you speak fast in English, it becomes raise your hand. If you look at it as je with no length, raise your hand, probably this is what we mean by coalescence, in the sense that A, B do not become CC, but they become C. Like they totally merge raise your hand. Okay, this is basically what coalescence is. Is sound 1 and sound 2 become sound 3. Okay, last but not least, I'm going to go back to something that I introduced in the beginning. Do you remember I said assimilation may happen diachronically, i.e. through a long period of time, historically, and result in the change of a language to another. So, classic example is Italian coming from Latin. And we know that when Latin died, a bunch of other languages were born, including Italian. So if you look at the way Latin words changed in every of these Romance languages, now we're looking at Italian, you would see that the changes were very systematic. And while the difference between Italian and Spanish and Portuguese and French and Romanian and any other Romance languages, the way these sounds changed. So depending on how they changed, the accumulation of all those changes became a different language. But now we are looking at a few examples from the way Latin changed to Italian. The word octo, which meant 8, and here I'm not phonetically transcribing and I'm sticking to the regular orthography. The k sounds k, si, sounds k. Octo became otto in Italian. Okay, so what kind of assimilation is that? It is regressive because the following sound influences the previous sound, right? It is total contiguous regressive assimilation. When it happens, like when you have total contiguous regressive assimilation of a certain class of sounds, and these would be a certain class of sounds, usually the process is applied universally through the language to all the words, or almost all the words, and that's how the language entirely changes. So again, here you have lectus becoming letto. So we are forgetting about the vowels, we're just focusing on the consonants. What is happening again is total assimilation, is contiguous, it's regressive, and it is assimilation. Another example, this might be a bit more tricky. The word subtus, which even in Latin was pronounced subtus because the T is voiceless and B is voiced, so they had already assimilated to subtus in pronunciation. They became sotto. Again, the same process. The reason I'm giving these examples is because this is not an example of variation. This is like an example of language change. Phonological processes can result in variation. Phonological processes can result in language change. These examples are examples of language change. So total contiguous regressive assimilation, and this process could have taken 50, 100, 200 years to be completed. Even the Sanskrit one was diachronic because it's the change of Proto-Indo-European to Sanskrit, so it took hundreds of years. But if you look at the case of Gav versus Gav in Persian, this is a case of variation. It means in Persian, both variants exist right now. Some people say Gav, some people say Gav. Of course, this is like kind of stigmatized form, like certain socio-economic groups might pronounce it, but still they exist side by side, which is what variation means. But in the case of Italian and even the Sanskrit one, the outcome of the change is replacing the old one. So the old one disappears, the new one takes its place. And this is change. This is not variation. Thanks for your time and attention, and see you again soon.